Okay, and this is chapter 4 of David Walliams' Grandpa's Great Escape. And earlier on, we'd found that Mum and Jack had just gone out looking for Grandpa, who has gone missing. So, chapter 4, Second-Hand Trike. The town was eerily unfamiliar at night. All was dark and quiet. In the deepest winter, a mist hung in the air, and the ground was moist after a heavy downpour of rain. Dad had taken the car, so Jack pedalled along the road on his trike. This trike was only meant for toddlers. In fact, the boy had been given the trike second-hand for his 3rd birthday and had outgrown it many years ago. However, his family didn't have enough money to buy him a new bike, so he just had to make do. Mum stood on the back, holding on to his shoulders. If any of his classmates from school had seen him give his mother a lift in his trike, Jack knew he would have to go and live alone in a dark and distant cave for all of eternity. Grandpa's military band music played out in Jack's head as he pedalled as fast as he could down the street. For a toddler's trike, it was deceptively heavy, especially with his mother standing on the back, her pink fluffy dressing gown blowing in the wind. As the wheels turned around on his trike, so did the thoughts in Jack's mind. The boy was closer to the old man than anybody. Surely he could guess where his grandfather was. Without seeing another soul on the way, the pair finally arrived at the town square. A pathetic sight greeted them. Dad was in his pyjamas and his dressing gown, hunched over a steering wheel of the family's little brown car. Even from a distance, Jack could see the poor man couldn't take much more of this. Grandpa had gone missing from his flat 7 times in the past couple of months. When he heard the trike approach, Dad sat up in his seat. Jack's father was wiry and pale. He wore glasses and looked older than he was. His son often wondered whether being married to Mum had added years on the poor chap. With the sleeve of his dressing gown, Dad wiped his eyes. It was clear he'd been crying. Jack's father was an accountant. He spent all day doing long, boring sums and didn't find it easy to express his feelings. Instead, he would bottle things up. However, Jack knew his father loved him very much, even though he was nothing like him. It was as if the love of the old adventure had skipped a generation. The old man's head was in the clouds, while his son's head was buried in books and figures. "Are you all right, Dad?" the boy breathlessly asked from pedalling. After his father wound down the window to talk to them, the handle came off in his hand. The car was ancient and rusty, and bits often fell off. Yes, I'm fine," Dad lied, and he held the handle aloft, not quite sure what to do with it. "So no sign of the old man?" asked Mum, already knowing the answer. "No," replied Dad softly. He turned away from them and stared straight ahead to hide how upset he was. "I've looked all over town for him for the past few hours." "Did you look in the park?" asked Jack. "Yes," replied Dad. "And the railway station?" "Yes, it was all locked up for the night, but no one was outside." Suddenly, Jack had an inspired thought, and he couldn't get the words out fast enough. "The War Memorial!" The man returned his gaze to his son and shook his head sorrowfully. "It's the first place I looked." "Well, that's it then," announced Mum. "Let's call the police. They can stay out all night looking for him, but I'm going back to bed. We've a big promotion on our Wensleydale at the cheese counter tomorrow, and I need to look my best." "No," said Jack. From secretly listening to his parents' conversation about Grandpa at night, the boy knew this could spell disaster. Once the police were involved, questions would be asked, forms would have to be filled in. The old man would become a problem. Doctors would poke and prod him, and because of his condition, no doubt Grandpa would be sent straight to an old folks' home. To someone like his grandfather, who had lived a life of freedom and adventure, it would be a prison. They simply had to find him. Up, up, up and away, muttered the boy. What, son? Replied Dad, mystified. That's what Grandpa always says to me when we're playing pilots together in his flat. As we take off, he says, up, up, up and away. So, demanded Mum. She rolled her eyes and sighed at the same time. So, replied Jack, I bet that's where Grandpa is. Up high somewhere. The boy thought long and hard about which was the tallest building in town. After a moment, it dawned on him. Follow me, he exclaimed, before speeding off down the road, pedalling his trike furiously. Chapter 5. Loon in the Moon. The highest point in the town was in fact the church spire. It was something of a local landmark that could be seen for miles around. Jack had a hunch that Grandpa might have tried to climb up there. When he had gone missing before, he had been found somewhere high up atop a climbing frame, up a ladder, even once on the roof of a double-decker bus. It was as if he needed to touch the sky, as he had done all those years ago as an RAF pilot. As the church came into view, there was a distinct silhouette of a man sitting on top of the spire. He was perfectly framed by the glow of the low silvery moon. From the moment Jack saw his grandfather, he knew exactly what the old man thought he was doing. He thought he was flying his Spitfire. At the foot of the tall church was a short vicar. Reverend Hogg had a rather obvious comb-over. What hair he had left was dyed so black that it was almost blue. His eyes were as small as penny coins, hidden behind black frame glasses. The vicar's glasses rested on his upturned piggy nose, which he was forever sticking in the air so that he could look down at people. Jack's family did not go to church regularly, so the boy had only seen the vicar out and about in the local town. But once he had seen Reverend Hogg carrying a crate of expensive-looking champagne from the off-licence. On another occasion, Jack could have sworn he saw the man cruising past in a brand new Lotus Esprit sports car, puffing on a fat cigar. Weren't vicars meant to help the poor? Jack couldn't help wondering. Not lavish money on themselves. This, being the middle of the night, Reverend Hogg was still wearing his bedclothes. The vicar's pyjamas and dressing gown were made of the finest silk, and he was sporting a pair of red slippers which were monogrammed C of E for Church of England. Around his wrist was curled a chunky gold diamond-encrusted watch. He was clearly a man who had the taste of the high life. "Get down from there!" barked Reverend Hogg at the old man, just as the family ran through the graveyard. "It's my grandpa!" shouted Jack, once again breathless from having pedalled so hard on his trike. Reverend Hogg reeked of cigars, a smell the boy could not stomach, and instantly felt quite queasy. Well, what on earth is he doing on the church roof? I'm sorry, Vicar, yelled Dad. It's my father. He gets confused. Then he needs to be under lock and key. He's already dislodged some of the lead off of the roof. From behind the gravestones, a gang of tough-looking men appeared. They all had shaved heads, tattoos, and teeth missing. From their overalls and spades, Jack assumed they must be grave diggers, though it seemed strange that they were digging graves in the dead of night. One of the grave diggers handed the vicar a torch, which he shone straight into the old man's eye. "Come down this instant!" Yet Grandpa did not respond. As usual, he was in his world of his own. "Rudder steady, holding on course, over," he said instead. It was clear he did indeed believe he was high up in the skies, piloting his beloved Spitfire. "Wing commander to base, over," he went on. "What on earth is he on about?" demanded Reverend Hogg, before muttering under his breath. "This man's a complete loon." One of the gravediggers, a big burly man, with a skinhead and a tattoo of a spider's web on his neck, spoke up. "Shall I fetch, the air rifle, Reverend? A few shots could be fired to scare him down." His fellow gravediggers sniggered at the thought. Air rifle! No! The boy needed to think fast if his grandfather was going to make it down to earth safely. No, he said. No, let me try. And Jack had an idea. This is base over, he called up. All the grown-ups looked at him in disbelief. Wing Commander. Bunting. Reading you loud and clear, replied Grandpa. Current cruising altitude is 2,000 feet. Ground speed is 320 miles per hour. Have been circling all night, but no sign of enemy aircraft. Over. Then your mission is accomplished, sir. Return to base, said Jack. Roger that. From the foot of the church, the group below looked up at the old man, still sat on the church spire, and he made an imaginary landing. Grandpa was completely convinced that he was behind the controls of his fighter plane. He even minded turning the engine off. Next, he slid open the invisible canopy and climbed out. Dad closed his eyes. He was so scared that his father was going to fall, he couldn't watch at the moment for a moment longer. Jack's eyes were wide open in terror. He didn't dare blink. The old man clambered down the spire onto the roof. For a moment he stood still on the narrow peak. Then, without a care in the world, he walked along it. But the piece of the lead that he had dislodged on the way up had left a dent in the roof. So after just a few paces, trip! Grandpa went flying through the air. No! Cried Jack. Dad! Shouted Dad. Ah! Screamed Mum. The vicar and the gravediggers looked on with grim fascination. The old man slid down the roof, dislodging some more of the vicar's precious leg tiles along the way. Smash! Smash! As they crashed on the ground. Grandpa hurtled over the roof edge. Whoosh! But at that moment, without making a fuss, the old man managed to grab onto the guttering and came to a stop. His thin legs were swaying in the night, his slippers bumping against the stained glass window of the church. Careful of the window! Shouted the vicar. Hold on, Dad, called Jack's father. I told you we should have called the police, added Mum, rather unhelpfully. I've a christening in the church first thing tomorrow, said Reverend Hogg. We can't be scrubbing bits of your father off of the ground in the morning. Dad! Dad! Called out Jack's father. Jack thought for a moment. If he didn't act fast, his poor grandpa was going to plummet to his death. He won't respond to being called that, said the boy. Let me. Jack then projected his voice once more. Wing Commander, this is Squadron Leader. Ah, there you are, old boy, Grandpa called down from the guttering. Jack's pretend name had now become real to the old grandpa. He believed that the boy was just a fellow airman. Just make your way along the aircraft's wing to your right, called up Jack. Grandpa paused for a moment before answering. Roger that. A moment later, he started shimmying his hands along the guttering. Jack's approach was utterly unexpected. Yes, it worked. You had to enter Grandpa's world if you wanted to get through to him. Jack spotted a drain pipe run down the side of the church. Now, Wing Commander, you see that pole to your right? Shouted the boy. Yes, Squadron Leader. Hold on tight and slide down it, sir. Both Mum and Dad gasped and covered their mouths as Grandpa swung like an acrobat from the guttering to the pipe. For a moment all was still as he held on tight at the top. However, his weight must have been too much for the pipe, and suddenly it came loose from the wall and started rapidly bending downwards. Had Jack said the wrong thing? Was he now sending his beloved grandfather hurtling towards the ground? No! Cried the boy. And that's the end of chapter 5. What's going to happen to Grandpa? We'll find out tomorrow.